Maria's days began before dawn. Her small apartment filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee as she prepared for the long hours ahead. She would tie her dark hair into a simple bun, her uniform pressed and spotless. Working for the Delacroix family wasn't a dream, but it was a job one that paid just enough to keep her afloat. Their mansion stood as a symbol of everything she lacked, its grand columns and sprawling gardens towering over her modest aspirations. But Maria didn't let envy touch her. Instead, she approached each day with quiet pride in her work, determined to prove her worth. The Delacroix family, however, rarely noticed her. Mrs. Delacroix, with her perfectly coiffed hair and designer dresses, glided through rooms issuing commands without looking up. Maria, the silver needs polishing. Maria, don't forget the upstairs guest rooms. Her words were sharp, efficient, and impersonal, as though Maria were an extension of the furniture rather than a person. Mr. Delacroix was even more distant, locked away in his study or entertaining influential guests with cigars and brandy. The children, spoiled by their privilege, dismissed Maria entirely, often leaving messes in their wake with no thought of the effort it took to clean them up. Despite the treatment, Maria found solace in small victories. The kitchen staff often chatted with her during breaks, sharing jokes and leftovers from lavish meals that would have otherwise gone to waste. She had a knack for organizing and cleaning that turned chaos into order, and though the family didn't acknowledge it, her contributions were vital. The mansion sparkled under her care, its marble floors gleaming, its windows crystal clear. But beneath Maria's quiet dedication was a yearning. She couldn't ignore a desire to escape this life, to build something of her own, though she had no idea how. Her life changed one afternoon when she was scrubbing the staircase, her knees aching from hours of work. Mrs. Delacroix stormed in, her face flushed with anger. In her hand was a necklace, an extravagant piece encrusted with diamonds and emeralds. "Maria, this was missing from my jewelry box," she snapped. Maria froze, her heart pounding. She had seen the necklace before, but had never touched it. "I didn't take it," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Mrs. Delacroix's expression hardened. "It was found in your cleaning supplies." "I can't believe this betrayal." Maria's protests fell on deaf ears. The butler, a smug man named Vincent who had always looked down on her, stepped forward. "I saw her lingering near the jewelry box earlier," he lied smoothly. Maria's head spun. She had done nothing wrong, yet the accusation had already cemented in their minds. The Delacroix family didn't question Vincent, nor did they give Maria a chance to explain herself. Within hours, she was dismissed, her belongings hastily packed into a small bag. As she walked out of the mansion for what she thought would be the last time, tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. They didn't even look her in the eye as they closed the door behind her. Her dismissal was swift and humiliating, a stark reminder of how little her dedication had mattered. Maria's pride was bruised, but more than that, her spirit felt crushed. She had given years of her life to this family, yet they had discarded her without hesitation. The world outside the gates of the Delacroix mansion felt cold and unwelcoming. With no savings to fall back on, Maria faced an uncertain future. But as she stood at the bus stop, clutching her small bag, something inside her hardened. She realized she couldn't depend on others to value her. She had to find her own worth. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something greater. The bus ride from the Delacroix mansion to the city felt endless. Maria clutched her small bag tightly, the weight of her dismissal sinking deeper with each passing mile. Her heart ached, not just from the injustice, but from the uncertainty that lay ahead. Every bump in the road felt like a reminder of how far she had fallen. When she finally stepped off the bus, the bustling city greeted her with indifference. People rushed past her, unaware of her turmoil, their lives seemingly full and secure. She had no job, no savings, and nowhere to turn. Maria's first instinct was to find work, but each door she knocked on seemed to close before it even opened. The accusations from the Delacroix family lingered, like a stain on her character. making employers wary. Her explanations of innocence were met with skeptical looks or outright dismissals. Even jobs she was overqualified for seemed out of reach. Days turned into weeks, and Maria found herself spending hours at the public library, scanning classifieds and jotting down leads on scraps of paper. Yet, every interview ended the same way, with polite rejection and an unspoken judgment. Her small savings dwindled quickly. Rent became impossible to manage, and Maria was forced to leave the modest room she had called home for years. With no other option, she sought refuge at a local women's shelter. The shared space, lined with cots and filled with whispered stories of hardship, was a far cry from the grandeur of the Delacroix mansion. Maria kept to herself, ashamed of her situation but grateful for a roof over her head. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with fear and doubt. How had her life unraveled so quickly? Was this her new reality? Hunger became a constant companion. Maria rationed what little she had, skipping meals to make the shelter's resources last longer. The pangs in her stomach mirrored the ache in her soul, a deep, gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume her. She often walked through the city streets, avoiding familiar faces, her pride too fragile to endure pity. She passed restaurants with warm lights and inviting aromas, their promise of comfort just out of reach. The humiliation of standing in line at soup kitchens was a bitter pill to swallow, but necessity left her no choice. One evening, as Maria sat on a park bench, clutching a paper bag with a meager meal, an elderly woman approached her. The woman, with kind eyes and a warm smile, offered Maria a scarf. "It's getting colder," she said simply. The gesture, though small, touched Maria deeply. She accepted the scarf with trembling hands, murmuring her thanks. That moment of kindness planted a tiny seed of hope in her heart. It reminded her that not everyone saw her as a failure. There were still people in the world who cared, even about strangers. Determined to turn her life around, Maria began looking for opportunities to improve herself. She noticed a flyer for free community workshops at a local center. Swallowing her pride, she attended a class on entrepreneurship. The instructor spoke about starting small, finding a niche, and building something from the ground up. For the first time in weeks, Maria felt a spark of possibility. She had always been resourceful and hardworking. Perhaps those qualities could help her create a new path. The next few months were a blur of small victories and crushing setbacks. Maria took odd jobs cleaning houses, babysitting, and even selling flowers on street corners. The work was grueling and the pay was meager, but it was a start. She saved every penny she could, determined to claw her way out of poverty. She spent her evenings at the library, studying business books and watching online tutorials on everything from budgeting to marketing. Each new piece of knowledge felt like a stepping stone, leading her closer to a future she could control. Despite her progress, the journey was far from smooth. Maria faced countless obstacles, from dismissive clients to unexpected expenses that threatened to derail her plans. There were nights when exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she wondered if her efforts were futile. But each time doubt crept in, she thought of the Delacroix mansion, the place where her dreams had been dismissed so easily. She imagined returning one day, not as a servant but as someone who had risen above the injustice. That vision fueled her determination, giving her the strength to keep going. Maria's resilience began to pay off. She secured a small grant from a local charity to start her own cleaning service. It was a modest operation, just her and a borrowed set of supplies, but it gave her a sense of purpose. Her attention to detail and genuine care for her clients quickly set her apart. Word of mouth spread, and her business grew. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, one step at a time. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. Maria's cleaning service began humbly, with her carrying borrowed supplies in a second-hand tote bag as she walked from client to client. Her first customers were local families who needed help with spring cleaning or small businesses looking to tidy up their offices. Though the jobs were modest, Maria approached each task with the same meticulous care she had once given to the Delacroix mansion. Floors gleamed, windows sparkled, and her clients began to notice that her work wasn't just thorough, it was extraordinary. What she lacked in resources, she made up for in dedication, and that dedication quickly set her apart. Her reputation grew slowly at first. Customers would recommend her to friends, who would in turn call her for their own cleaning needs. Maria seized every opportunity, even when the hours were long and the pay wasn't always fair. She knew she was building something bigger than a service. She was building trust, and trust, she realized, was the foundation of any successful business. It wasn't long before she saved enough money to buy her own cleaning supplies and a simple uniform that made her look more professional. Each small investment felt like a step forward, proof that her efforts were paying off. The turning point came when Maria landed a contract with a mid-sized office building. The owner, impressed by the glowing recommendations from her clients, decided to give her a chance despite her small operation. It was the break Maria had been waiting for. The job was larger than anything she had tackled before, requiring her to clean multiple floors and work through the night to meet the tight schedule. But she didn't hesitate. She hired a few temporary workers from the community center, where she had taken her first entrepreneurship class, creating an opportunity for others who, like her, were looking for a fresh start. The success of that contract opened doors Maria hadn't thought possible. More businesses began to contact her, and she soon realized she couldn't manage everything on her own. She needed a team, but more importantly, she wanted her team to share her vision of excellence and compassion. She reached out to the shelter where she had once stayed, offering jobs to women who were struggling to rebuild their lives. Maria saw herself in their eyes, the desperation, the hope, the determination, and she knew they would bring the same resilience to their work that she had. As her business grew, Maria faced new challenges. Managing a team was vastly different from working alone, and she had to learn quickly how to delegate, resolve conflicts, and maintain quality standards. There were moments of frustration when mistakes were made or when a client wasn't satisfied, but Maria refused to let setbacks derail her progress. She began taking night classes in business management, using every spare moment to improve her skills. It was exhausting, but Maria thrived on the knowledge that each challenge she overcame was a step closer to her dreams. Over the years, Maria's cleaning service expanded beyond her initial scope. She diversified her offerings, adding specialized services like eco-friendly cleaning and post-construction cleanup, which attracted a broader range of clients. Her company became known not just for its high standards, but also for its commitment to uplifting the community. Maria's story began to circulate in local media, a former Maid who had turned her life around and was now giving back in meaningful ways. The publicity brought in more business, but it also brought something Maria hadn't expected: respect. With her growing success, Maria was finally able to leave behind the struggles of her past. She moved into a small but comfortable home, a far cry from the shelter where she had once sought refuge. She no longer worried about her next meal or how she would pay her bills. Yet, she never allowed herself to forget the journey that had brought her here. Every morning, as she prepared for another busy day, she would remind herself of the promises she had made, to never take her success for granted, and to always use her platform to help others rise. Maria's company expanded further, branching into multiple cities and employing dozens of people. She began attending networking events and conferences, connecting with other entrepreneurs and learning from their experiences. Her confidence grew, and with it, her ability to think bigger. She secured partnerships with larger organizations, negotiated contracts with major corporations, and reinvested her profits into growing her business. Each milestone felt surreal, a far cry from the days when she had knocked on doors, begging for a chance to prove herself. Despite her growing wealth, Maria remained grounded. She knew that her true success wasn't measured by her bank account, but by the lives she touched along the way. Her employees often told her how their jobs had helped them regain their footing, pay off debts, or support their families. Hearing their stories filled Maria with a sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement. She wasn't just building a business, she was building a community. One day, while reviewing her company's financial reports, Maria received an unexpected call. It was a journalist from a prominent magazine who had heard about her journey and wanted to feature her story in an upcoming issue. The thought of sharing her experiences on such a large platform was daunting, but Maria knew it was an opportunity to inspire others. She agreed, and the article became a turning point in her life. It not only brought her more recognition, but also opened doors to new ventures, including public speaking engagements, where she could share her insights on resilience and entrepreneurship. As her name became more widely known, Maria found herself reflecting on the mansion where her journey had started. The humiliation of her dismissal still lingered in her memory, but it no longer felt like a source of pain. Instead, it had become a symbol of everything she had overcome. When she learned that the Delacroix mansion was being put up for sale, a strange mixture of emotions washed over her. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave that chapter of her life behind. But another part of her, the part that had driven her to succeed, knew that this was a moment she couldn't ignore. Maria made the decision to buy the mansion, not out of revenge, but as a testament to her journey. It was no longer about proving herself to the Delacroix family or to anyone else. It was about reclaiming her past and transforming it into something meaningful. As she signed the paperwork, Maria felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. She wasn't the same person who had scrubbed floors and polished silver under the family's indifferent gaze. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to turn her story into something extraordinary. The Delacroix family had always been synonymous with wealth and influence. Their mansion was a symbol of their status, with its grand gates, meticulously landscaped gardens, and lavish interiors that dazzled every guest who entered. For years, they had basked in the glow of their reputation, confident that their fortune would last forever. But beneath the polished surface, cracks had begun to form, cracks that would eventually shatter the foundation of their lives. It started with whispers in social circles. Mr. Delacroix's business empire, once revered, began to face scrutiny. Rumors spread about risky investments and questionable financial practices, but the family dismissed them as baseless gossip. They continued hosting extravagant parties, throwing money at luxuries, and maintaining the facade of stability. Yet, behind closed doors, the stress was mounting. The patriarch spent long hours in his study, poring over documents and making frantic phone calls. His once commanding presence grew haggard, his tailored suits hanging loosely on his frame. Mrs. Delacroix, oblivious to the severity of their situation, continued her lavish spending. She ordered custom-designed jewelry, redecorated the mansion, and planned elaborate vacations, all while ignoring the mounting bills. Her entitlement blinded her to the storm brewing around them. The children, equally sheltered, carried on with their privileged lives. They flaunted designer clothes, drove luxury cars, and assumed their world would always revolve around comfort and excess. None of them realized how precarious their situation had become. The breaking point came with a public scandal. A major project spearheaded by Mr. Delacroix collapsed, revealing fraudulent practices that had been used to secure investors. The news exploded across media outlets, dragging the family's name through the mud. Former allies distanced themselves, and once loyal business partners turned their backs. Lawsuits followed, along with investigations that uncovered years of mismanagement and unethical behavior. The empire that Mr. Delacroix had built crumbled in a matter of months, leaving the family scrambling to salvage what they could. Their social standing evaporated almost overnight. Invitations to exclusive events stopped coming, and acquaintances avoided them in public. The family, who had once looked down on others, now found themselves the subject of ridicule and disdain. Their mansion, once a source of pride, became a constant reminder of their fall. Maintaining such a lavish property was impossible with dwindling finances, and soon, the reality they had ignored for so long could no longer be denied. As the bank accounts drained, Mrs. Delacroix struggled to adapt. Her shopping sprees turned into desperate attempts to bargain with creditors. Her friends, once eager to sip champagne with her in the mansion's sunroom, stopped answering her calls. The Delacroix children, too accustomed to their pampered lives, had no idea how to cope. They had never been taught the value of money or hard work, and now they were forced to confront a world that no longer catered to their every whim. The mansion, their crowning jewel, was the last to go. Its sale was a bitter pill to swallow, but there was no alternative. The family held on to the hope that a private buyer would allow them some dignity, but even that small comfort eluded them. The auction was a public affair, and the sight of strangers touring their home opening doors, inspecting rooms was a humiliation they couldn't escape. Each step through the grand halls reminded them of their former glory, now slipping through their fingers. For Mr. Delacroix, the loss of the mansion marked the end of an era. He had always seen it as a testament to his success, a legacy he could pass down to his children. Watching it slip away felt like watching his own failure etched into stone. He avoided his family in those final days, retreating into his study to avoid confronting the pain in their eyes. His pride, once unshakable, had been replaced with regret, a regret he would never voice but carried with him like a weight. The family's fall was complete when the mansion was officially listed for sale. The once proud Delacroix name, emblazoned on invitations and whispered in admiration, now lingered only as a cautionary tale. Friends had turned into strangers, and their influence had evaporated. What remained was a fractured family, each member struggling to find footing in a world that had moved on without them. For the first time, they were forced to confront the people they had become. Mrs. Delacroix, stripped of her luxuries, faced the harsh reality of a life without wealth to shield her from consequences. The children, without the safety net they had always relied on, stumbled through attempts to find independence. And Mr. Delacroix, once a titan of industry, faded into the background, consumed by the shame of his actions. As they prepared to leave the mansion, packing what little they could keep, the Delacroix family was a shadow of its former self. The halls that had echoed with laughter and opulence now felt hollow, the grandeur a cruel reminder of what they had lost. The final blow came when the buyer was revealed, their identity turning their humiliation into something far deeper. The Delacroix family had lost their wealth, their home, and their pride, and soon they would learn that fate had yet another twist in store for them. The day of the mansion sale arrived, and the Delacroix family gathered in the drawing room, a place that had once been the heart of their lavish lives. The walls, adorned with gilded frames and elegant wallpaper, now felt oppressive, suffocating them with memories of better times. Mr. Delacroix sat stiffly in his chair, his face a mask of reluctant resignation. Mrs. Delacroix fidgeted with her pearl necklace, a habit born of anxiety, while their children remained silent, their usual complaints stifled by the weight of their collective humiliation. Outside, potential buyers walked up the grand steps of the mansion, their murmurs and laughter filtering through the open windows. Strangers now had the freedom to tour their private world, peering into rooms that once symbolized their wealth and status. The sight made Mrs. Delacroix's stomach churn, but she dared not voice her discomfort. Instead, she clung to the hope that whoever bought the mansion would preserve its grandeur, perhaps restoring a shred of the family's dignity in the process. When the final buyer was announced, the room fell silent. The real estate agent stepped forward with a polite but tight-lipped expression. "The mansion has been sold," he said, his voice professional yet tinged with curiosity, as if he too had been surprised by the outcome. "The buyer will be here shortly to finalize the paperwork." The Delacroix family exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to stay or leave. But their pride kept them rooted to their seats. They wanted, at the very least, to see who would take over their legacy. Moments later, the sound of footsteps echoed through the marble foyer. The doors to the drawing room opened, and Maria stepped inside, her presence calm yet commanding. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her posture confident but unpretentious. The Delacroix family froze, their disbelief painted across their faces. Mr. Delacroix's jaw tightened. Mrs. Delacroix's hands flew to her necklace, and the children exchanged confused glances, unsure if they were imagining what they saw. Maria, however, remained composed. She met their shocked stares with a calm, measured gaze, taking in the room that had once been a source of so much pain. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady but not devoid of emotion. "I understand this might come as a surprise." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, a sound that seemed to reverberate louder than any conversation in the room. Mrs. Delacroix was the first to recover, though her voice trembled. "Maria?" she asked, her tone laced with disbelief and an edge of defensiveness. What are you doing here?" Her eyes darted toward the real estate agent, as if expecting someone to explain this unthinkable scenario. Mr. Delacroix said nothing, his face a mix of anger and confusion, while the children looked at Maria as though seeing her for the first time. "I'm here as a buyer," Maria replied simply, her gaze unwavering. The words hit like a thunderclap. For a moment, the room was filled with stunned silence. Mrs. Delacroix's hand fell from her necklace, and Mr. Delacroix leaned forward, his expression darkening. "You!" he finally said, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You're the one buying this house?" "Yes," Maria said, her tone firm but not confrontational. "I've come a long way since I left here. This house is part of my journey, and I felt it was time to reclaim it not as your maid, but as someone who has built something of her own." Mrs. Delacroix's face flushed. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, her words caught in her throat. Mr. Delacroix, however, wasn't so restrained. "This is a mockery," he said, his voice rising. "What gives you the right to succeed?" Maria interrupted, her voice still calm, but tinged with steel. "To rise above the circumstances I was thrown into? With respect, Mr. Delacroix, I owe you no explanations. This is a business transaction, one I've already fulfilled." The tension in the room was palpable. Mrs. Delacroix finally found her voice, though it was softer now, almost pleading. "Maria," she began, "we never meant. It wasn't personal when you were let go. You must understand that." Maria's eyes softened briefly, but her resolve remained unshaken. "It was personal to me," she said quietly. "Being dismissed without a chance to defend myself after years of service wasn't just a professional loss. It was a wound that took a long time to heal. But I'm not here to dwell on the past. I'm here to move forward." As she spoke, Vincent, the former butler, appeared in the doorway, summoned to assist with the final details of the sale. His presence brought a flicker of recognition to Maria's eyes, and for the first time, a trace of anger surfaced. "And perhaps," she added, her gaze narrowing on him, "it's time the truth came out." Vincent paled, shifting uncomfortably under her scrutiny. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Maria took a step closer, her calm demeanor now edged with intensity. "You framed me," she said, her voice firm but controlled. "You planted that necklace among my things, didn't you? Because you wanted me gone." The room fell deathly silent. All eyes turned to Vincent, who swallowed hard, his face betraying his guilt. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he muttered, his voice barely audible. I thought you were getting too close to the family. I didn't want to lose my position." Mrs. Delacroix gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Delacroix looked stunned, his usual composure shattered. You did this," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Vincent looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "It was a mistake," he mumbled, but the damage was done. Maria took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Thank you for admitting it," she said, her tone steady. "But it doesn't change the past. What's done is done. All I can do now is move forward." Her words hung in the air, a final statement that silenced any further protests. Maria turned to the real estate agent, who was waiting awkwardly by the door. "Shall we proceed with the paperwork?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. The agent nodded quickly, grateful for the opportunity to escape the tense atmosphere. As Maria finalized the purchase, the Delacroix family sat in stunned silence, processing the turn of events. The mansion, once a symbol of their power, now belonged to the woman they had dismissed so carelessly. Yet, Maria's composure and grace left them without words. She wasn't there to gloat or seek revenge. She had come as a victor, but also as someone who had risen above bitterness. When the papers were signed, Maria turned to face the family one last time. "I hope this can be a new beginning for all of us," she said. "I have no interest in holding on to the past. What matters is what we do moving forward." With that, she left the room, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The Delacroix family remained seated, each lost in their thoughts. For the first time, they were forced to confront not just their fall, but the strength and dignity of the woman they had underestimated. The Delacroix family remained seated in stunned silence long after Maria left the room, the echo of her footsteps fading into the distance. Each member wrestled with their own emotions: shame, regret, and disbelief. For years, they had looked at Maria as just another servant, someone who existed in the periphery of their lives. Now, they were confronted with the undeniable truth of her triumph and the stark contrast to their own decline. The reality of their downfall and her rise left an indelible impression. Maria, meanwhile, stood in the grand foyer, taking in the space that had once been a symbol of her humiliation. The chandeliers above sparkled as they had in the past, but this time, they reflected a different light, a sense of closure and empowerment. Yet, she knew her work was far from over. She hadn't purchased a mansion to exact revenge, but to transform it into something meaningful. A space where others could find hope and opportunity, just as she had once dreamed of for herself. Over the following weeks, Maria began the process of converting the mansion into a community center. Her vision was bold. The sprawling rooms would become classrooms, training spaces, and counseling centers. The once exclusive dining hall would serve as a communal area for shared meals and gatherings. The gardens, meticulously maintained for show, would be repurposed into community vegetable plots, providing fresh produce to those in need. What had been a sanctuary for the privileged would now become a haven for the underserved. Maria's plans were met with mixed reactions from the Delacroix family. At first, they struggled to accept her intentions. Mrs. Delacroix couldn't hide her disbelief. "You're turning this place into a community center," she asked during one of their final conversations. "Do you really think that's appropriate for a house like this?" Her voice carried a faint echo of the entitlement that had once defined her. But Maria, undeterred, responded with a calm certainty. "It's not about the house," she said. "It's about what it can become. This space has the potential to change lives, not just mine, but countless others." Surprisingly, it was the youngest Delacroix child, Isabel, who first showed signs of understanding. Isabel had always been more sensitive than her siblings, though her privilege had often shielded her from the realities of the world. Seeing Maria's transformation had shaken her, and she found herself curious about the plans for the mansion. "What can I do to help?" she asked one afternoon, her voice tentative but sincere. Maria, recognizing the vulnerability in the question, offered her a role in organizing events for the center. It was a small step, but an important one. The rest of the family followed slowly. Mrs. Delacroix, though hesitant, began contributing by volunteering her time to sort through the mansion's belongings, helping to identify items that could be sold to fund the renovations. Mr. Delacroix, whose pride had suffered the greatest blow, initially kept his distance. But as he watched his wife and children become involved, he felt compelled to participate. With his background in business, he offered to manage logistics for the project, a role that allowed him to regain a sense of purpose. For Maria, working alongside the Delacroix family was a bittersweet experience. She saw glimpses of the humanity she had once doubted in them, and though the scars of her past couldn't be erased, she chose to focus on the present. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about excusing their actions, but about freeing herself from the weight of resentment. The mansion's transformation became a shared endeavor, bridging the gap between her and the family that had once dismissed her. As renovations progressed, the community center began to take shape. The first event was a job fair, bringing together local businesses and residents looking for employment. The turnout exceeded expectations, and Maria watched with quiet pride as people filled the once exclusive space, their laughter and conversation breathing new life into the mansion. Isabel, now fully invested in the project, organized activities for children, while Mrs. Delacroix helped coordinate catering. Even Mr. Delacroix, standing in the background, couldn't hide a faint smile of satisfaction. The impact of the center was immediate and profound. Maria's efforts created opportunities for people who had felt forgotten by society. Women from the local shelter, much like Maria once had been, found jobs and resources to rebuild their lives. Young adults attended workshops on financial literacy and career development. Families gathered in the communal spaces, sharing meals and stories that brought a sense of belonging. Each success story added to the growing legacy of the center, solidifying its role as a beacon of hope. For the Delacroix family, their involvement in the center brought its own form of redemption. Mrs. Delacroix, once focused solely on appearances, discovered a sense of fulfillment in helping others. She developed a program to mentor young women, sharing her experiences and lessons in resilience. Isabel, inspired by Maria's journey, decided to pursue a career in social work, determined to make a difference beyond the walls of the mansion. Even Mr. Delacroix, though still reserved, found solace in contributing to a project that gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Maria, however, remained the heart of the transformation. She moved through the center with quiet grace, her presence a reminder of what determination and compassion could achieve. The mansion, once a place of division, had become a space of unity. Its walls no longer echoed with exclusivity, but with laughter, learning, and connection. Maria often reflected on the journey that had brought her here, grateful for the struggles that had shaped her and the people who had supported her along the way. The final phase of the transformation was the unveiling of a plaque in the mansion's entryway. Inscribed with Maria's name and a dedication to resilience and community, it stood as a testament to what the mansion had become. The Delacroix family, now humbled and deeply involved in the center's success, stood alongside Maria during the ceremony. For the first time, they looked at her not as a former servant, but as an equal, someone who had taught them lessons they would carry for the rest of their lives. As the ceremony concluded, Maria stood in the grand foyer, watching as people filled the space with energy and purpose. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before, a certainty that her journey had come full circle. The mansion, once a symbol of her pain, had become a place of healing not just for her, but for everyone who walked through its doors. The Delacroix family, too, had found their own path to redemption, proving that even the most broken of people could find a way to rebuild. For Maria, it was more than a victory. It was a legacy. The transformation of the mansion into a community center was finally complete, and the day of its grand opening arrived with an air of excitement and anticipation. Maria stood outside the gates, looking up at the structure that had once symbolized everything she thought she couldn't achieve. Now, the building radiated a new energy, gone were the stark reminders of exclusivity and privilege. In their place stood a space that invited connection, opportunity, and hope. Vibrant banners fluttered in the breeze, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air as people gathered to celebrate. The courtyard was buzzing with activity. Families arrived with children who ran excitedly to explore the playground Maria had insisted on adding to the garden. Volunteers guided guests through the newly renovated rooms, where classrooms, workshops, and meeting spaces had been thoughtfully designed. Every detail spoke of a purpose greater than luxury. This was a place built to uplift, to inspire, and to heal. Maria moved through the crowd, greeting attendees with warmth and humility. She wasn't one to bask in the spotlight, but today was special. It wasn't just the opening of the center. It was a culmination of her journey, one that had taken her from despair to triumph. Inside, the once intimidating drawing room had been transformed into a welcoming common area. Plush sofas and bookshelves filled the space, creating an atmosphere of comfort and inclusion. It was here that Maria addressed the crowd, standing before a group of supporters, partners, and community members. Her voice, steady and confident, carried through the room as she shared her story not as a tale of revenge or success, but as a testament to the power of resilience and compassion. "I know what it feels like to stand at a crossroads, unsure of where to turn," she said, her eyes scanning the faces of her audience. "I've been in a place where hope seemed distant, where the future felt uncertain. But I also know that with determination, and with the right people willing to believe in you, there's no limit to what can be achieved. This center isn't just about my story, it's about yours. It's about giving people the tools and the support they need to create their own paths forward." Her words were met with applause, but it was the genuine smiles and nods of understanding that struck her the most. Among the crowd, Maria noticed familiar faces. Women from the shelter where she had once stayed now stood with pride, many of them employed or pursuing new opportunities, thanks to the resources the center had begun providing even before its official opening. Children who had benefited from early programs waved excitedly, their joy filling the room with an infectious energy. Even the Delacroix family was present, their presence no longer defined by awkwardness or shame. Isabel had taken on a leadership role within the center, organizing events and mentoring young participants. Her enthusiasm was evident as she guided a group of teenagers through a career workshop, her face lighting up as she connected with them on a level she hadn't thought possible. Mrs. Delacroix, once so focused on appearances, had found purpose in coordinating community meals, ensuring that everyone who visited felt nourished and valued. Her once pristine demeanor now carried an air of warmth, a far cry from the aloofness she had once exuded. And then there was Mr. Delacroix. Though his pride had been the hardest to overcome, he had thrown himself into the logistics of the center with surprising dedication. He managed the finances, ensuring that every dollar was used wisely to sustain the programs. Watching him interact with staff and volunteers, Maria saw glimpses of a man who had rediscovered his sense of purpose not as a businessman driven by wealth, but as someone who could contribute to something meaningful. As the day unfolded, Maria found moments of quiet reflection amid the festivities. She walked through the halls of the mansion, now bustling with life in a way she had never seen during her years as a maid. In one room, a group of women attended a workshop on entrepreneurship, their faces alight with curiosity and determination. In another, children gathered around a storyteller, their laughter echoing through the space. Every corner of the mansion held a new story, a new beginning for someone who had stepped through its doors. One of the most poignant moments came when Maria visited the kitchen. It had once been a place where she had worked tirelessly, scrubbing pots and preparing meals she could never taste. Now, it had been transformed into a communal cooking space where volunteers and visitors worked side by side, sharing recipes and stories. A young woman approached Maria, her hands dusted with flour. "This place has given me a chance to rebuild my life," she said softly. "Thank you for believing in people like me." Maria smiled, her heart full. "You're the reason we're here," she replied. "Keep going, you're stronger than you know." The day ended with a ribbon-cutting ceremony in the courtyard, a moment that felt almost surreal to Maria. Surrounded by supporters and the people whose lives the center would touch, she held the scissors and paused. She looked at the Delacroix family, standing off to the side but watching her with expressions that spoke of respect and gratitude. In that moment, Maria felt no resentment, no lingering bitterness. All she felt was peace, a sense that everything had come full circle. When the ribbon fell, the crowd erupted into applause. The center was officially open, its doors welcoming everyone who sought a fresh start. Maria stood among them, not as the woman she had been, but as the person she had become, someone who had turned pain into purpose, struggle into strength, and a house that once symbolized exclusion into a place of inclusion and possibility. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the mansion, Maria found herself alone for a brief moment in the grand foyer. She looked around, taking in the space that had once loomed over her, but now felt like an extension of herself. This was no longer the Delacroix mansion. It was a home for everyone who needed it, a place where stories could begin again. Maria smiled, her journey far from over but her heart full, ready for whatever came next. As the evening quieted and the last of the guests trickled out, Maria stood in the grand foyer, the soft glow of the chandelier above illuminating the space. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions, triumphs, and connections, yet now, in the stillness, she felt the weight of it all settling in. The mansion, once an oppressive reminder of her struggle, now stood transformed not just in its purpose, but in its meaning. What had once been a house defined by exclusivity and detachment had become a living, breathing symbol of community and resilience. Maria walked slowly through the rooms, each one buzzing with the memories of the day. In the library, where the Delacroix children had once ignored her while she dusted the shelves, she saw books carefully selected for visitors who wanted to learn and grow. She imagined young minds absorbing knowledge there, finding inspiration in stories far removed from their own lives. In the dining hall, where she had served meals in silence, she now saw laughter and conversation from the opening day's communal feast. Every space was alive with possibilities, its history redefined. Her footsteps carried her to the gardens, the cool night air refreshing against her skin. She traced the paths she had once swept clean, now lined with budding plants in the community vegetable plots. People had lingered here earlier, talking, planning, sharing dreams of what they could grow. It was a simple idea, yet it held so much power, a reminder that even the smallest seeds, given care and time, could grow into something transformative. Maria smiled at the thought, feeling the metaphor resonate deeply within her. In the distance, she noticed a figure standing by the fountain. It was Isabel, staring at the rippling water, lost in thought. Maria approached quietly, her presence gentle but purposeful. Isabel turned as she heard the soft crunch of gravel, her expression one of gratitude mingled with vulnerability. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "Not just for today, but for giving me a chance to see things differently. I never realized how much I took for granted until I saw what you created." Maria placed a reassuring hand on Isabel's shoulder. "Growth is never easy," she said, "but recognizing it is the first step. You've already begun to make a difference here, and that's what matters." Isabel nodded, her eyes shimmering with emotion. For Maria, this moment was as fulfilling as the applause earlier in the day. Seeing Isabel and others find purpose in the center's mission was the true measure of success. As the night deepened, Maria returned to the foyer, where she found Mr. and Mrs. Delacroix waiting. They looked out of place in the center's new context, but their presence was genuine. Mr. Delacroix cleared his throat, his once commanding voice softened. "Maria," he began, hesitating as he searched for the right words. I want to apologize for everything, for the way we treated you, for not listening, for failing to see who you really were." Mrs. Delacroix stepped forward, her usual poise replaced by a rare vulnerability. "We were blind," she admitted, "to your worth, to your potential, and to your humanity. I don't know if we can ever make up for that, but I want you to know how deeply sorry we are." Maria looked at them, their faces etched with sincerity. The apology, years in the making, touched a part of her that she thought had long since healed. She could see the weight of their regret and understood that their journey, like hers, was one of transformation. "I've already forgiven you," she said softly. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger would have kept me tied to the past, and I needed to move forward. But hearing this now, it means more than I can say." The Delacroix nodded, their expressions a mixture of relief and gratitude. For the first time, they stood not as her employers, but as equals, humbled by her strength and grace. They spoke for a while longer, their conversation unguarded and honest, until Maria gently excused herself to take in one final moment of solitude. She made her way to the grand staircase, her footsteps echoing faintly in the stillness. Standing at the top, she looked down at the foyer. Her perspective changed from the days she had cleaned its floors. She saw not the past, but the future where the mansion would continue to hum with life, filled with the hopes and dreams of those it served. Every challenge she had faced, every moment of doubt, had led her to this point. It wasn't just about reclaiming the space, it was about creating something far greater than herself. Maria thought of the countless people who had already begun to benefit from the center. She thought of the young woman in the kitchen, the children laughing in the library, the women who had found jobs through the center's programs. These were the stories that mattered now, the ones that would define the mansion's legacy. She felt a profound sense of peace, knowing she had turned her pain into purpose and that the ripples of her journey would continue to spread. As she descended the staircase, the mansion seemed to envelop her in a quiet embrace. It was no longer a place of servitude or struggle, but a testament to resilience and transformation. Maria reached the bottom step, pausing to take one last look around. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the space, its light reflecting not just on the polished surfaces, but on the possibilities ahead. Stepping outside, Maria closed the doors behind her, feeling the cool night air wrap around her. The stars above seemed brighter, as if acknowledging the chapter she had just closed and the new one she was beginning. For Maria, this wasn't an ending, it was a continuation, a promise to herself and to the community she had built. The mansion was no longer her burden to carry, it was her gift to give. And with that thought, she walked into the night, ready for whatever lay ahead, her heart full and her spirit unshaken.